Art Therapy and Nonverbal Rapport Building with Lisa Thompson and Gina Ko.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you for taking the time today to sit with me to talk about art therapy. I'm curious about nonverbals when you work with your clients. Can you walk me through some things to be cognizant of regarding nonverbals?
Sure. Um, One of the things that when I was doing my practicum studies that I found was um, it almost seems kind of obvious, but yet something that we maybe don't recognize when we first start out is just from the moment someone walks into the waiting room, we're communicating with them right from the beginning. And so just the way we have our waiting room set up, if we're meeting with families that have children, to have some toys that are accessible and clean and interesting. Like it creates a safe, welcoming environment. And I think that that first impression is so important. And then I can remember um, being a practicum student at CFTC and watching um, some of the therapists who had been there for a long time, senior therapists, and how they greeted clients. And again, it was in the nonverbal. It wasn't necessarily what they said, but it was how they did it that seemed really powerful. Um, and the fact that they knew everyone's names from, even though they hadn't met them, they knew the entire family. And just because they had read the intake form before, they knew everybody's ages. So of course you can kind of just um, you have a pretty good idea of who's who. And so they would greet everyone by name, and then they would one therapist in particular would kneel down and look up at the youngest child and look at them in the eye and welcome them, and then typically help them gather some toys that they were playing with while they were waiting, and just helped them to put some of the toys away, invited them to bring a special toy that you could sense that they were really enjoying, so that you weren't ripping it out of their hand, but just like, yeah, bring that with you. And it just created like this first impression was so powerful and welcoming. And a child who might feel like, okay, so I'm here and my mom and dad feel there's a problem with me, so this is why we're here. All of a sudden it shifts that feeling of, yeah, this is a fun place, like, and this therapist is actually so lovely, and I'm and feeling comfortable and welcome in being in that environment. So those were nonverbals just from the get-go that I thought were really important. And that same feeling moves into the therapy room. And one thing that I always wanted to do is have that room look inviting especially when my young clients came in. And so we have a table at CFTC in every room that sits low, so it's a good size no matter what your height is. And I'd always have some paper on the table and lots of different art supplies that were just there for them. So it would just, hopefully when they turned the corner and they walked in the room, immediately it felt like this welcome environment. And they'd often look at me to see if it was okay if they started coloring or whatever. And um, and of course, like, I was like, yes, please help yourself, and providing this little first activity where we could just warm up and feel comfortable. Um, Another thing that I would typically do, I'm quite tall and I often wear boots. And so I was afraid that sometimes my height would be intimidating for a child. And so I got in the habit of taking off my shoes and sitting on the floor with them.
Mm.
And we would often do a genogram to start as our like a first activity to get to know the family. And so I again, yeah, like a nonverbal of just me coming down to their level immediately and sitting with them and inviting them to help me with the genogram. Also, just was building that rapport right from the beginning. There were days where I wore, like in the winter, I might have some really colorful ski socks on or something, striped socks. And I actually found like the kids, they would notice my socks. And so I started thinking, oh, maybe I need to start collecting some fun socks. And so it would be just this other little reveal of my personality, or just a surprise when I took my socks off or my shoes off, and revealing something fun on my feet.
Mm.
So those were some of the things that just at the very beginning were important nonverbals.
Mhm. So Lisa, you've shared from the beginning, in the waiting room greeting and in the beginning of the session, and some things to be mindful of during the session. So are there any other nonverbals you can think of, throughout? What about ending the session? Would there be other thoughts there?
Mm. Well, just kind of to sum up, I always like to like just lean forward, smile on my face, um, kind of scooch forward in my chair sometimes too, like just in to like a gentle reminder that our time is winding down.
Mm.
And um and that signals before you know I look at my watch and say, okay, I just need to be mindful of the time. So there's all of these so there are some little nonverbals, I guess, that suggest that the time is winding down. When someone is really focused on an art activity, and they kind of drop down into um, we call it an affective space. It's kind of like they're in the zone,
Mm.
and working on their art. One thing that I have is a little chime. It's just a tiny little bell that I ring, and that's a nonverbal too, just to let them know like the time is coming to an end where we're going to shift to a different activity, or we're going to shift topics, or a transition to getting ready to go. And and just that little chime is just such a gentle way to pull them out of that affective space back into a more cognitive space. And so that's something that we were introduced to at VADI, at the Vancouver Art Therapy Institute, where I took my training. And we all just loved listening to that bell. It was just so much more gentle than someone saying, "Okay, you have like 2 minutes left, and then you need to wind up." So that's something I've carried with me, and it's been I think a lovely transition piece too.
That chime sounds lovely. I prefer that over, okay, time's up in 2 minutes.
Mhm.
That makes sense. Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with me today. And I've learned a lot in terms of using some of those ideas even in my own practice. Being mindful of nonverbals throughout. So again, thank you for your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.